Righty, and back once again and wearing the same shirt. Was this a batch recording? Was this recorded on multiple days? We'll never know. Maybe I just own multiple shirts. But the next one that we'll be looking at now is one of the more popular ones that's been floating around, the kind of the intro that I had to personality related AI, which for a geek like myself who loves body language and profiling related stuff because I'm completely socially inept and need to know as much information as possible when speaking to a person, Humantic AI was one of the ones that kind of popped up for me at one point. I can't even remember where. I probably stumbled across them, but they've been a pretty big player in the field lately as an interesting new piece of tech that a lot of people have started to take notice of as well. They've been posting quite a bit of content as well in terms of how their system thinks and how to implement it as a sales team. Amar Preet is quite active in that regard. They've got a podcast as well, I think, called the ASL Authentic Selling live podcast that they've been running on how to utilize their system in your day to day as a salesperson. So once again, it is very clearly geared towards sort of the sales team. Generally, is probably going to be the people that use it most. Maybe the HR guys. I see that they also reference things like RevOps in there as well. But across the board, probably one of the more popular ones lately. Been doing quite a bit of developments and getting into some interesting conversations with some interesting integrations. Your big outreach and sales loft and those types of guys are also starting to integrate with them. Lavender apparently uses them in the back end, which was quite cool that I found out from Ahmad Preet as well. But without further ado, let's take a look at Humantic, shall we? So I'll link down to their website as well. But I quite like the layout of their website. They kind of cover quite a lot as far as sort of who they are for and what they do and what their functions are, depending on the company and all this type of stuff. So taking a very quick look at their website, they break down the functions quite well, giving you sort of an idea of what to expect, couple rundowns, what everything is, disk selling, one-click personalization, which we'll take a look at as well, automated enrichment, so on and so forth. I think they added in here, yes, buyer intelligence, what they've noticed. And I had a conversation with a couple of people from their engineering team that mentioned the similar thing, right? So that they saw a marked increase in response rates when people started using this stuff in terms of their outreach. Lavender says the same thing, right? Personalized emails, slightly shorter, or at least according to Lavender, slightly shorter, a little bit more personalized, tends to get higher response rates. What seems to be, well, what my understanding is from the Humanity guys is that adding a layer of personalization to how the person wants to receive and read emails, are they more facts and figures based, and then you need to have more facts and figures in your email, or they're a little bit more to the point and only really care about what's in it for them kind of thing, might also be one of the things that pushes up that response rate. Haven't tested it out myself at scale yet. Very curious to do so. We'll take a look at some interesting stuff that I've been playing around with and been brainstorming to see how that might work with one of my favorite platforms, Apollo, to see how that would be done with one of their dashboards. But there's some pretty interesting stats around this to say that, you know, if a person receives an email the way that they want to communicate via email, they're more likely to engage with it. The same as sort of having a slightly more short to the point email that leads with curiosity tends to get better responses as opposed to a sort of long talking at the person thing. And again, Lavender covers this quite a bit. And they have all the usual reviews and stuff. Having done the sign up, the only thing that I found a little bit prohibitive about Humantic, as much as I like them, is that you can't sign up with a Google or a Gmail address. They only allow you to sign up if you have a company address. And I can understand they're interested in kind of rolling this out to big sales teams, but if you're an individual who wants to start leveraging this type of stuff and just test it out, and you don't necessarily have a business address yet, it can be a bit of a hurdle. I'm not sure what the thinking was behind that, but that's one of the things that I noticed. There's a little bit of a stumbling block when I compare with them and Crystal Nose and like Human Linker, for example, is that it's a little bit easier to sign up with them with just a normal Gmail address as opposed to with Humantic, where you need a company address in order to get in. And they also don't really have a free version. They've got a 7-day trial period, which you can test out, and that's about 50 profile views that you can do. But after that point, you have to go on to a paid plan which we'll take a look at as well now in terms of what you have access to. But from what I can remember, I can't seem to find pricing here. I know that they had it. Get started. Pricing. There you go. I also have quite a bit of knowledge, quite a good knowledge base in terms of leveraging this stuff as well. Let's take a look at their pricing plan. If I can find it. There you go. All right. So one of the stuff that I quite like as well is that there's a bit of a difference between individual and organization. So organization tends to be a bit more expensive, but you get a lot more mileage out of what you're going to be using. So it's obviously geared towards doing the stuff at scale for a team of people. Probably not as relevant to everyone, but you can see a lot more. So you can view a lot more profiles. But for the individuals, the one thing that I was struggling a little bit with is the costing for the starter and the pro, which is only done annually, as opposed to the expert, which again it's $50. It's not overly expensive, but at $50 a month, it starts getting a little bit more pricey. But you get access to a lot more, which we'll take a look at as well, as far as sort of what you get in those key plans. So it's a bit weird to me to have the starter and the pro only being annual, but the expert being one that you have flexibility to do monthly or annually. But all in all, kind of in line with what you'll see between most SaaS products nowadays, sort of $50 being the average for individual users to come in. Quite like that they have the buying committee stuff as well here, which we'll take a look at as part of the little experiment that I'd like to run at some stage, see what you can get out of it. But yeah, that's more or less what you're looking at pricing wise. My experience with the onboarding was when I spoke with a member of their team, it's relatively hands-on, sort of like what's your plan, how do you want to use this, how can we help? If you need help, send us a message and we'll see if we can hop in, help you out with some stuff as well. So their customer support was quite good when I came on board with them a while back just to test it out. Very helpful group of people. Always a pleasure to speak with them as well. But that's more or less what you're looking at pricing wise. If you're looking at organizations, again, it becomes a bit more expensive, but rolling it out over to a team, quite like the fact that there's personalized cadences, enhanced lead scoring for this type of stuff. But again, very much more geared towards a business buying this as opposed to an individual, since they have minimum users at each one. But that's the pricing. The next one that we'll take a look at would be the actual extension. Having just come off of the Crystal Nose one, it looks very familiar. This one I found is a little bit more accurate to how it assesses my personality. So again, they have an episode where they speak to a professor that helped them build out the actual AI system and what the AI needs to go look at in order to make an assessment of who the person is. Highly recommend it. If I can find it, I'll link it down below as well. But looking at this, I quite like that they have a confidence level. Human Linker has it as well. Same with Crystal Nose. But theirs was a little bit more accurate as far as the person that I am. I found that Humantic is a little bit more accurate than Human Linker and Crystal Nose when it comes to the assessment side and how to approach the person. So yes, I am indeed a researcher. I am a little bit more of a C type, so more analyst, sort of skeptical, like I mentioned last time. Quite like that. They also added in, which is quite cool, is there's a plugin that sits on your LinkedIn profile as well. They can say, well, what's the person's local time? Especially if you're reaching out to a different country zone, it usually helps a little bit to know what time it is by them, so that you don't call them at an inappropriate time, you know. So that's something I quite like about them as well. A brief summary of what to expect when talking to someone like me and how I might move in a conversation, this type of stuff. It's nice, short, punchy stuff. Kind of detail orientated, which is true. ROI seeker and perfectionist, yes, unfortunately. Eye for detail. It gives you a little bit of guidance as well on how to sell to the person. So when writing an email, this is also something I quite liked. They give you the guidance on how to do it. Didn't notice necessarily that they help write the actual email that you can go edit after, but the guidelines are quite nice as well, right? So if you're using something like a ChatGPT and plug this in and say, look, here's a rough email I'm writing, here's the guidelines that I need in order to write this email or personalize it to this type of person, and then you have probably a good email. But they do have a one-click personalization function, which also works quite well, which should edit most of the stuff out. So I quite liked this function from them. qualifying and prospecting as well on how to approach the person. Again, not everybody wants to be prospected and qualified the same way. Quite like these guidance, what to do, what not to do when qualifying and prospecting them. But again, one size doesn't fit all. There's usually quite a bit of info out there to say, well, this is the best way to prospect to everyone, which is a little bit of a blanket response. Again, the averages might balance out, but you can probably gear towards a better outcome if you start implementing some of the stuff that you see on places like these AI personality profiles. And they're getting a lot smarter, which is quite interesting. I love seeing the development there. Negotiating and closing, so much like with Crystal Knows earlier, they're breaking down the sales steps quite well, which I liked about them as well. So you know when you've booked a meeting with this person, or you need to book a meeting, what steps do I need to take? Once I booked the meeting and we've done qualification with them, and we're going through to the closing conversation, what do I need to do? How do I need to prepare myself to approach that conversation, which I quite liked, as opposed to sort of having a very rigid framework of, well, I need to ask these and these and these questions. You can adapt your framework according to the DISC personality profile. Setting expectations also quite like. They have your personality stuff here, the measures, so you can sort of see where they fall. They also have the big 5 personality profile. Haven't taken a big look into that yet, but I know it's also quite a popular one. So I know that they combine these two to make a nicely fleshed out profile of how to speak to the person, taking into consideration DISC as well as the ocean profile and combining them to give a decent output. I suspect that that's partially why they get a little bit more accurate info. And here's the one-click personalization. So this is where you would then plug in the person's LinkedIn profile if you're not using it within the actual LinkedIn extension, and you can type in a subject line and an actual email, right? I'm not going to do that right now, but you will see how it personalizes it. So let's say random subject. This was quite fun to watch, and they implemented this not too long ago. Hi, Dylan. Have some cool tech to show you can help your team personalize to prospects more effectively in a shorter amount of time. Oh man, my spelling is terrible. Amount of time. Talking to them the way they like to communicate. Communicate, especially with correct spelling. Open to a chat. Go, and let's see what it says for personalization. One-click personalization, nice and quick. Again, if you have a template of a rough email that you might send out, that's sort of the broad strokes of what it might include, this will help quite a bit. My understanding when I spoke to Amarpreet was that they're using Lavender's guidelines, so the Lavender email writing tool. Lavender uses them in the backend, and they seem to use Lavender's best practices as well in the actual personalization function. Again, they did also recommend, don't take this as gospel. The email is roughly personalized to the person, but maybe add in some details as well. But having a base email that you can write that includes the details and stuff that you think is necessary, and just copy and pasting it and doing personalized emails one at a time, this is something that you can do quite easily. Take a look through this type of stuff, see if you like it or not. Sometimes it works, not all the time. It's a bit of a crapshoot sometimes, but I quite like that they added that in as a means of being able to write an email a bit quicker. So copy and pasting in, and then say, cool, help me do the heavy lifting, and take some of the guidance above that they've given to you to say, this is the best practice for writing an email to this person, and apply it into the email. That was quite cool. I quite like that as well. But yeah, that's the extension. The next big thing that I quite liked is that they added a dashboard. So this is something that I quite liked about Humantic specifically, is that there was a dashboard function where you can upload profiles. So for a salesperson to be segmenting their list, often the segmentation that we all tend to do is sort of job function, job title, maybe industry, this type of stuff. They're adding a layer on top of this now where you can add a CSV of people's LinkedIn profiles. So if you're going onto Apollo and saying, cool, here's my prospect list, I'd like to extract them, and then upload that list. Let's say it's your high priority accounts, right? You might have a buying committee, which they have at the bottom there as well, which breaks down where everybody might fall on a spectrum, which we'll talk about in a second. But what I liked about this is you can then further segment your list, and they've done this at Humantic as well, to say, well, of the 200 people that I could potentially speak to in my target account for this month, for example, where do they fall in terms of the disc personality profile, so that I can then personalize and segment my list and speak to them the way that they like to be spoken to, especially because you can then start streamlining your process and saying, I'm going to do calls from 8 to 10 in the morning to all the D personality types, and then from 11 to 12 I'm going to do C, etc., 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 and have a coherent talking point with each one as you reach out to them. And the same can be done with your emails then. So that's where the interesting experiment starts coming in. But then they let you also extract this. They capture quite a bit of data here in terms of what their description is, as well. Their personality types, where they fall on that little bar on the side where it was, descriptions as well, experience, education level, all this type of stuff. But if you open up the actual CSV that you extracted, they go a little bit more into the detail here. So it's all the usual stuff, personality description. What I quite liked is that they also captured interests and hobbies. I'm not sure where that pulls it from. That's an interesting little tidbit that you could add into your outreach as well, with like custom variables, if there is one available. LinkedIn profiles, and then it's all the usual stuff that you can get from like an extraction from a CSV, like Apollo, for example, titles, first name, this type of stuff. But I quite liked this for the segmentation. So if you have 200 people in here, you can say, okay, cool, well, I want to have a email campaign that goes out to the dominant type. So let's filter for just the dominance only. Cool. Here I can then add in a custom variable that has a different type of email for these people. So I can have 4 different sequences. And this is what was recommended to me by the team as well. Don't go and write a email for all the potential combinations of the disk type. So if it's DS and you have to write an email for that, what they recommended was either write a email to the disk group, so DCIS, or you can write an email for the disk archetype, right? The doer evaluated. I think there's about 14 or 16 of these within them. They have a document somewhere which breaks it down. So you can have either 14 to 16 different types of emails, or 3 or 4 of them for the disk groups, right? What would be really cool to do, and this is probably an API integration, is if you can upload this and then somehow have a communication between Apollo, for example, if you're using Apollo as an outbound sequencer, and Humantic speaking to each other to then automatically route people based on what their LinkedIn profile says into different types of groups instead of doing it manually, right? So you can do it manually. It would be cool if you could do it automatically as well. I don't know how it would work, since Apollo has access to the person's LinkedIn profile, that it then analyzes it and then says, cool, this person ticks off the box for a dominant type. He needs to automatically go through the plays into the dominant personality type profile. Or if you're doing the archetypes, really interesting to speak to the guys at Apollo as well as Humantic to see how that API might work and if it's possible. I'm not a programmer, so maybe it's not. Maybe it's a pipe dream, but that would be an interesting little test to do, to say, well, we've got this list of people that we could potentially speak to, and we're prioritizing the archetypes, because the archetypes go a bit more into detail as opposed to this group. So let's route the doers into a specific sequence and the evaluators into a specific sequence, and they receive different types of emails versus just the dominant or the C or the yes or the I. But again, maybe a bit of a rabbit hole. But quite like that function as well was the dashboard. One of the things that they also added in, I spoke with the team there, was the actual buying committee stuff. So this works nicely if you have to do multi-threading. So you can sort of, if you got through the discovery phase with the initial discovery call, and now you need to go and speak to the person that you reached out to, as well as 2 or 3 other people in his team, to then decide on next steps. So this is where the analyzing buyer committee fragment comes in. So you know how to expect the conversation might go. If the person's a skeptic, you know that you need to answer more questions for them to put them at ease about numbers and outcomes and ROI. Versus if the person is more of a D type, you know that they only really care about winning. So you can talk about that to them as well. So this is something I quite liked about the actual buying committee stuff. They break it down quite well and also tell you who's likely going to be your champions and who's likely going to be your skeptics, who's going to be friendly, who's going to be neutral, so that you can go in armed with this info and prepare the conversation and know where to spend time with each person. They go into quite a bit of detail around this type of stuff. Here's the usual do's and don'ts as well. When speaking to them, it's the same stuff that you'll see on the individual profiles, just now as a committee side. If it was possible to use this and use Humantic on a Gmail account, it would have been nice to try it out for if you're on a job hunt, for example. Maybe you have an interview with the HR person and then also the manager in one meeting. And you can prepare and say, well, I've got these two people. How do I need to speak to them in a group? Please help because I'm anxious and it's scary because there's multiple people. But unfortunately, you need to have a business account in order, or a business email address in order to use Humantic. But I quite like this function for them. There's some interesting use cases here where you can start playing around with segmenting your groups by personality as well as job function and writing emails that would be relevant to them. So taking what Lavender does a little step further as well, saying, well, we're going to be relevant, but we're also going to be relevant by personality, and then test that out and see how that works. And from the data I've seen from Humantics, guys, it looks like it works quite well. If you're segmenting it, what they've done is that they'll segment it and then assign the dominant types to people on their team who have a more dominant personality because the communication style comes naturally. And same for C's and I's and S's. But yeah, that's an interesting little piece of tech. The not necessarily the granddaddy, but the popular kid on the block when it comes to the personality AI and assessment type stuff. I don't know if they necessarily spearheaded all the personalization fact and like one-click personalization, but there's been a couple of them popping up. And again, it's an interesting trend seeing these guys happen to come out over the period when we're all working from home. That's an interesting little social experiment that we might need to test out at some point about why that's important. Maybe I can have Amarpreet and his team on to talk to them about why that happened and why they thought it was important to start launching it when people were working from home. But that's later on down the line. Hope you guys like this stuff. Let me know down below if this is something that you guys want to see more of. And a couple of use cases. I'm going to probably run a couple of experiments with these if I can. See if there's a way to segment them and do what I spoke about with the Apollo stuff as well. Otherwise, have a good day, guys. Cheers.